This video mini lecture is about Lee Canter's Assertive Discipline. This is the most popular authoritative approach in our local area and probably nationwide. I frequently find that teachers or principals will say to me, oh, we use assertive discipline. And I find out that no, they really don't. What they do is use bits and pieces of Lee Canter's Assertive Discipline, and sometimes they even use them wrong. I'm going to talk about the system as a whole. It is best implemented on a school-wide basis. It can be implemented by a group, like all the fourth grade teachers, but it works best on a school-wide basis with the full support of the administration, parents, everybody on the same page. Without that, individual teachers can implement it. I think it's helpful, it works well, but as we go through the principles, you will see why it works best on a school-wide basis, and it also needs to be implemented with training from people who understand the system. All right, Lee Canter's Assertive Discipline. Basic principle is that students have the right to learn in a safe, orderly environment with support and encouragement. Now, you remember authoritative approaches really are effective in maintaining the rights of students who want to learn. Canter's Assertive Discipline says students have the right to learn, and that might include some students who aren't particularly interested in learning, but in a good, orderly system, they buckle down, they behave, and they learn. Students have the right to learn in an environment that is safe and orderly with good support and encouragement. That's your morale, that's your attitude. Okay? And Canter says these things are not contradictory. The safe, orderly environment with a lot of learning, support and encouragement, the whole package. I hope you think back to the beginning of the course when I told you that the best way to educate and raise children is warm and firm. This is Canter's belief. The best way to run a school, a classroom, is warm, lots of support and encouragement, firm, focused on learning. All right. Canter also believes that teachers have the right to teach without disruption. The idea that discipline problems, disruptions, things that take you off from teaching and that interfere with students' learning are not justifiable. That you as a teacher, you went through X years of college and all these courses and you got yourself licensed to teach, you have the right to teach without disruption. All right, there's a myth. I struggle with it all the time. The myth is that if you design lots of meaningful, interesting instructional activities and keep kids busy all the time, you will not have any behavior problems. I actually even hear principals say this to beginning teachers who are having problems, or to even experienced teachers. I have worked with a beginning teacher in her second or third year who was just pulling her hair out, frustrated. She couldn't control her classroom. She couldn't control student behavior. And her principal kept telling her, you need to design more interesting lessons. So she would design, as best she could, more interesting lessons. And the behavior in the classroom didn't improve. In fact, it may be actually got worse. This is not true. It is true that if you keep kids busy all the time in learning activities, you won't have any behavior problems. The problem is getting them actively engaged in those learning activities and keeping there. It is far more than whether the lessons are interesting, much more. All right, teachers have the right to establish optimal learning environments. Again, you're a professional, you're competent, you know what the optimal learning environment is, you have the right to establish it. You have the right to expect behavior from students that promotes learning. Again, you're the professional, you know what you're doing, you're committed to kids' well-being, you have the right to expect behavior from students that promotes learning. you have the right to backing from administrators and parents. And this raises some pretty serious questions. If you go into a school and you're there as a teacher and you don't have decent textbooks for your students or other materials, your rights are being violated, your students' rights are being violated. Now, people in that situation may laugh cynically and say, yeah, right, but it is very profound in our democracy to think about schools where students and teachers are not getting their rights met. Canter says you have the right to support, to backing from administrators and teachers. You're a professional, you're competent, you know what you're doing, you're dedicated to students. If you have behavior problems and disruptions, and you have set up your classroom right, and you deal with those behavior problems and disruptions appropriately, you have the right to be backed by principals and teachers, principals and parents. Right here you can see why assertive discipline works better on a school-wide approach, properly set up, good professional training, support from and backing from administrators, good communication with parents in the community, because you're going to be asking for their support, for their backing. All right. In Canter's system, I'm going to give you a very general overview, no detail. The biggies, you set up rules, 4 to 6. Broad coverage, I hope this is sounding familiar to you. Broad coverage. Behavioral, focused on behavioral. Canter would not accept the rule, respect other people. And I've talked in previous lectures about this. I don't object to that rule, but if that's one of your rules, respect other people, I agree with Canter. You better define that real clearly in multiple ways so that we understand the behavior, the children and you understand the behavior that is and is not respecting other people. Canter says got to be behavior. Got to be specific and measurable. Now, measurable, I don't mean, 1, 2, 3. I mean that we can tell if you are in the classroom, in your seat on time, and properly prepared for instruction to begin when the bell rings. It's measurable. Yes, you are. No, you're not. And it should give you what you need to teach. Canter advises teachers to think very carefully, very deeply, what do you need to teach? What kind of order, what kind of big basic rules do you need in your classroom in order for you to teach effectively? Canter also says teachers need to get rid of some roadblocks. The first is low expectations for student behavior and learning, particularly in schools that are what people call rough, that have a lower class clientele, lower class student body, maybe a majority minority school, lower class African American kids, lower class Hispanic kids, lower class immigrant kids, a lot of kids whose home language is not English. Parents are unemployed, parents are marginally employed, undocumented aliens, you name it. People often have low expectations for learning and behavior in those schools with those children. That is one of the most insidious forms of discrimination possible. To overtly discriminate against a child because of race, ethnicity, sex, whatever, pretty overt. There are ways to deal with that. But the discrimination of simply not expecting much is very hard to deal with. Typically with those populations, parents don't know how to interface with the school. They may be intimidated. They don't know how to get in there the way a middle or upper middle class set of parents will and push teachers and principals and other school officials. They don't know how to get in there and make their kids get attention. Often they don't They may not be well educated themselves. They don't know what to expect. And it is a rare child. It's a rare college student who will go complain because he or she is not being well educated. You do start to see it in some cases at the college level, and even there it's rare. And the reason you do start to see it there is typically that's when people start to pay for their own education. All right? We need to get rid of low expectations for student behavior and learning. It's a terrible thing to do to kids, and it's a terrible thing to do to us as teachers. We need to get rid of lack of confidence in self and ability to control the classroom and teach. Canter type assertive discipline schools, you are expected to control the classroom. You are given backing. You're taught how to set up your rules and procedures, enforce them, and you just really should get rid of this inferiority complex. The third roadblock is lack of parental involvement and cooperation. In a school using assertive discipline should actively reach out to the community, whether it's upper middle class, lower class, involve parents, and insist and educate and convince that you need their involvement and you need their support in the school. You need their cooperation. People often mistakenly assume or believe that parents from lower class backgrounds don't care about their children's education. People even say that. And the discriminatory phrase is often said, well, you know, those people don't really care about their children's education. That is not true. There's just no group on earth, except maybe drug addicts, and I believe they care. They're just unable to do anything about it. There's no group of people on earth who do not love their children, care about their children, want their children to become educated and to succeed within their understandings and their ability to interface with the educational system. We want parental involvement and cooperation. All right. A basic concept in Canter's system is a hierarchy of consequences. Many of you are familiar with this. It's used quite commonly in classrooms. However, there are other ways to structure consequences. For example, Kerwin and Mindler recommend a menu of consequences. You have a bunch of consequences from which you as a teacher can select depending on the child and the situation. That's one approach. You can actually have no specified consequences. I have seen teachers who ran a really well orderly classroom, so orderly that they didn't have any specified consequences. If there was a rare need for a consequence, they just assign one. Okay? But with Canter, you have a hierarchy of consequences. There's some variation possible, but typically Canter's hierarchy starts with a warning. In some cases, you say to the student, that's a warning. You've already had your rules posted, and you say to the student, that's a warning, Michael. You might, in some systems, write the child's name on the board, and if you have a next incident, you put a check or whatever. Some upper middle class parents object to writing children's name on the board because supposedly it embarrasses the child. My personal view is if it's going to humiliate you to get your name on the board, then let's follow the rule and not do the crime. However, if you're working with that particular population, you may not want to put children's names on the board. Then there is a small penalty, whatever is appropriate. 2 minutes after class, talk to me, whatever. Something appropriate within the system. Then you have a larger penalty. Now, the number of steps is also flexible. You may not want this many steps, but typically a warning, a small penalty, a larger penalty, At some point, parents are contacted. Again, you can see why it's really important to have parental involvement and support up front. At some stage, you're going to contact parents. And then contact principal. The child goes to see the school disciplinarian. Some variations in this. I recommend that teachers build in what I call, if you're going to use a warning system, I recommend that you build in what I call a no fussing clause. If you're going to use this approach, the rule is when I give you a warning, you do not fuss. You do not object. You don't say to me, I was not doing that, he was doing, you don't fuss back at me. If you think I was mistaken in giving you a warning, or if you believe I was mistaken in giving you this second level penalty, what you do is see me after class or before recess or at some appropriate point, and we'll talk about it. No fussing when I use this system during our instructional period. I also recommend that teachers build in a clause that says, you know, if I set up this hierarchy of consequences and I find that it's not working, I have the right to change the consequences. If I set up a system that has silent lunch as the third level and I discover that that's not working with you, I have the right to take that penalty out and substitute something else. So you build in a substitution clause. Canter also asks teachers to build in what he calls a severe clause. Now we have this hierarchy here, but if you do something that's just so outrageous, so unacceptable, horrible, you go straight to the principal. We don't go through this kind of system here. Examples of severe behaviors might be assaulting another student, angry outburst in profanity, whatever. So you have the severe clause. All right, basically you have a hierarchy of consequences and you build in those appropriate clauses, and those are the three I recommend you build in. There are some issues here. Teachers typically wait way too long to contact parents about behavior problems. They also wait too long to contact parents about academic problems. You go through a whole 6-week or 9-week grading period and you send home an F, and the parents will squeak and fuss saying, you didn't tell us, we didn't know he was failing, right. And you say, well, to yourself probably, well, what'd you think all those zeros I was sending home for your signature meant? Okay, but you don't say that. It's real important early on to make the contact and say, we're having some problems here with behavior, here's what it is. We're having some problems with academic performance, he's not doing his homework. At least make the contact early, even if you don't get any response from the parents. Make sure you contact them early on. If you have reason to think that the parents are going to give you problems, involve somebody else in contacting them with you. It might be the counselor, it might be the principal or assistant principal, but make the contact. Even if you get negative response, even if you get no response, make the contact early when you've got chronic problems. No corporal punishment. Canter, in his system, does not permit corporal punishment. Sometimes a school will say, well, we're implementing assertive discipline, and one of the steps, one of the penalties in that hierarchy will be corporal punishment. If you do that, doesn't matter how you feel about corporal punishment, if you do that, Canter will disavow you. In his system, there is no corporal punishment. All right, to implement Canter's system for the whole school rules, and for each classroom, you develop a discipline plan. Guess what? Rules, consequences, and rewards. You teach students the discipline plan. All right, here's our themes coming over again. You don't tell, you teach your discipline plan. You teach students specific procedures for your major activities. All right, here's rules and procedures again. You review and reinforce as needed. Now, with Canter's system, part of the strength is that it is supposed to be developed on a school-wide basis with the training and the group work to develop all those rules and procedures. So if you got this teacher down the hall who is real lackadaisical and lets students run wild up and down the hall, and there's all kind of trouble and screaming and kids are jumping out the windows, this school-wide approach enables fellow teachers and principal to move in on that teacher pretty consistently and say, we're all in this together. We all have teaching and learning. You will develop a discipline plan. You will have rules and procedures. You know, we can help you. They're yours for your classroom. And then you're going to enforce them consistently, blah, blah, blah. Then the school-wide plan has school-wide enforcement, and you also are required to develop rewards and consequences for your school-wide plan. So kids, the old catch 'em being good, you observe kids following the rule for whatever, and you report the kid for doing something good. And you have some sort of reward periodically or recognition for the kids who are good, who are behaving well as consequences for those who break the rules. If you're interested in Canter's approach, it's not the only acceptable or good authoritative approach. As I mentioned, it is the most common, most widely known. A little bit of repetition here. Try for a school-wide approach. If not, a group of teachers, fourth grade, whatever. Get yourself a good trainer who knows what they're doing so that you implement it well. Get your principal support, get your parent support, and it's a good system and it works.